sleep is a really good way of nudging our behaviors towards health, greater health. The more we can sleep at the right times and sufficiently, then we are consciously as well as non-consciously going to make better choices about being active, having the energy to move healthily, and be inclined towards eating foods that are more nutritious for and relevant for our needs at any one time.
Shumai guys, welcome back to the Life to the Full podcast, the podcast that helps you make the most of your time here on Earth. My name's Dav Morse, I'm your host, and it is a pleasure to be back on the microphone with you. I am pumped and excited about today's episode because I have a guest on, and she is incredible, Dr. Caroline Horton. We've been going through a series on physical health here on the podcast, and we've looked at the importance of physical health, what the benefits are of lifting weights for longevity and strength and metabolic rate. We've looked at the importance of breathing and what the incredible physical benefits are on that. Today we are going to be thinking about sleeping for our physical and emotional health. Much like breathing, it is something that everybody does, and everybody does it every day. Sleeping is so important. So today we are looking at what is sleep, what is dreaming, what happens when we shut our eyes to bed down for the night, to get warm and snuggly. What are we going to do during the night? Sleep is for so much more than just getting your energy back. We're going to look at that today with Dr. Horton. We're going to look at the importance of sleep and learning. We're going to dive into sleep hygiene and how sleep hygiene maybe as a term could be updated. We're going to look at the classic question, how long you should actually sleep for. By way of introduction, I hate the question, so what do you do? So I've prepared a little introduction for Dr. Caroline Horton. Caroline is a chartered psychologist and academic. She is a reader in psychology at Bishop Grosseteste University and formerly led the PhD and psychology programs there. She is now the director of DrEAMSLab based at BGU in Lincoln, UK, where her research interests principally span the fields of sleep, health, dreaming, memory, and emotion regulation, and the relationships between these concepts. She is also the co-director of the Lincoln Sleep Research Center. Before joining BGU, Caroline obtained her undergraduate and master's degree in psychology from the University of Durham, her PhD from the Institute of Psychological Sciences, University of Leeds, and a PGCHE from Leeds Metropolitan University. Caroline has worked at a number of universities across the country and is affiliated to numerous professional societies, including the British Psychological Society and British Sleep Society, for which she is trustee and treasurer. Following that introduction, Dr. Caroline Horton, welcome. Thank you very much for joining me on the Life to the Full podcast. Tell me a little bit about how you got to do what you're doing today.
So I had quite a traditional academic career. As an undergraduate psychology student, I remember having a seminar with a professor in the department around memory, and it just really captured my interest. And that started me on an academic route exploring memory. So I started off looking at memory and how memory works and how we experience these sometimes wonderfully sensory experiences. Sometimes they just flood our memories involuntarily, and that really captured me. And actually through that, I started wondering why some people remember their dreams particularly vividly and some people just don't. So I then pursued a master's and then a PhD based in a memory lab where I was looking at these qualities of dream memories, trying to understand why we remember some experiences more than others, why they're emotional, and why some people seem to get by just fine remembering nothing. And that led me then to realising how exciting and wonderful dreams are, and furthermore, how wonderful and essential sleep is. And I've done lots of exploring along the way to get there.
That is excellent. So you started off with an interest in memory, and then it's transferred into pursuing excellency in the world of dreams and sleep. So give us some basics. So some of my listeners may not know anything about sleep, and then some might have done a little bit of, reading, as is the way with some of my listeners that are a little bit like me, just have a vague overview of what's going on. But let's start at the basics, and then let's go from there. What happens when we sleep and what happens when we dream?
Well, they're different questions. We know more about sleep than we do about dreaming. When we go to sleep, we transition through a number of different phases. Our bodies physiologically change in terms of temperature, everything slows down, our breathing changes, we have changes in muscle tone. And then, in terms of our brain activity, that transitions through some pretty crazy stages and adventures as well. And I don't use the word crazy lightly. We could even say that in certain stages of sleep, we are quite literally psychotic. We're seeing things that aren't there. We have really strong sensations that these experiences are real, even though they're just hallucinations. And then often we wake up and we forget about everything afterwards. So we go crazy every single night. And after we've experienced all of that, we are better able to fight bugs. We feel better about ourselves. We think we look better. We eat more healthily. We are emotionally regulated, so we make good decisions. So, this physical experience of sleep that is multifaceted and includes lots of different stages recuperates us, helps us fight off illness, gives us energy. I mean, that's the thing we think of most clearly with sleep. It rests us so we can live another day with great energy, but also psychologically and emotionally and cognitively, it's allowing us to work at optimal capacity.
That's something that not a lot of people are really thinking about when they're going to sleep. They're thinking just upon the I am tired, I need a rest. And they don't really consider the importance of sleep when it comes to, like you said, fighting off bugs, your physical health, making good decisions. People make really suboptimal decisions about lifestyle choices, about food, about nutrition when they are not very well rested and they haven't had enough sleep. And so it's fascinating to think that whilst we're asleep, all these things are going on. Most of us have no idea about it at all. Different question then. What happens when we dream?
Now, that's a harder question for lots of reasons. But when we dream, um, well, as a starter, dreaming occurs during sleep. And that sounds perhaps quite obvious, but it's important to remember that a definition of a dream really is any mental experience that we can remember after we've woken up. So, in that sense, a dream can look like many different things, and we don't remember most of our dreams, and that makes it really hard to study them. And again, as I mentioned earlier, some people remember their dreams quite regularly, and some not at all. But when we dream, we experience typically different sensations. In an imagined way. So some of those sensations are really happening. So it may be that we feel like we can't breathe or we feel like we're choking. And that might be because we've got a duvet over our face. So, some of those kind of things we can make sense of. But the majority of dream content comes from our memories and from current concerns and sometimes past experiences, memories, and concerns as well. And they're all mixed up in this haphazard way. So we get little fragments of experiences from different times of our lives mixed with some kind of current sensations. And they create a kind of new experience that's going to be quite different to something that we've experienced in waking life. They're typically quite emotional, a bit more emotional than our experiences in daily life. But we also have this memory bias towards remembering the most emotional experiences. So the things that we typically remember of our dreams are really the most emotional ones, like the nightmares. But actually, if we sample our dreams more systematically, they can be quite mundane. They're always a bit interesting, but they tend to refer to more realistic daily activities.
Excellent. And I read that as we're sleeping, we're going through the uh, REM cycles, so rapid eye movement cycles. We're going in and out of REM and non-REM sleep. And mostly the dreaming occurs in the REM stages of sleep. And this is your research that I've been reading, the later in the night the dreams are, the more emotional they. And maybe that's why we remember more of the emotional dreams, like the ones that we've just woken up from, rather than the ones that we had earlier on in the night.
Yes and no, in that we certainly work through different sleep
Okay.
cycles when we go to sleep, and we tend to prioritize in our first half of a night of sleep. So around the first 3.5 to 4 hours, we have more deeper sleep, which is responsible for kind of the really essential physical recovery processes. We do know that those stages of sleep help certain kinds of memories and experiences as well. And then in the latter half of the night, we start getting more of these REM cycles, and those REM cycles last a little bit longer each time we transition through them. So we can think of our sleep as being kind of big waves. We kind of go down into the deeper stages first of all, and then we pop up quickly for REM, and then we go down for a little bit less deep sleep, and then we pop up for a little bit more REM. So we have that shift in proportion of deep versus REM sleep across the night. And you're right in that lots of people think that dreaming is associated with REM, or rapid eye movement sleep. And rapid eye movement sleep is where we're almost awake. It's sometimes referred to as paradoxical sleep because we are physically asleep, but we can be easily roused. And in terms of brain activity, there's an awful lot going on. It's quite like we're awake. So if we wake up from rapid eye movement sleep, we often remember a dream. And so for that reason, people think that REM sleep is associated with dreaming. However, we are dreaming in other stages of sleep. It's just harder to wake up from and drag that dream memory over into wakefulness. So REM dreams are the most emotional, the most easy to recall, the most dreamlike. But my view is that we dream the whole time because we always have stuff going on in our minds all the time. We're always conscious. Sometimes we can't remember our experiences, but that doesn't mean that we haven't been having them and dreaming the whole time that we're asleep.
So it's interesting that you said that some people seem to remember their dreams more than others. Is it something that you can train yourself to do? Is there any benefit of training yourself to do that? Because I've, in my varied interests in my past, uh, come across. I might ask you about lucid dreaming later on, but this idea of recording your dreams and writing them in a dream journal. I've kind of used it as a stepping stone towards attempting lucid dreaming, which I haven't managed to successfully do yet because uh, various reasons you need a little bit more extra sleep at the end of the night. But what would be the benefits of remembering and recording your dreams?
Yeah, great question. What would be the benefits of remembering them? Well, they can be quite enjoyable for some people. Um, But over and above that, we don't necessarily think there's a benefit of remembering dreams over and above just having the opportunity to dream. There doesn't seem to be a deficit in people who still sleep well but don't remember their dreams. It may be actually they've got quite a good sleep routine and they're just waking up at a healthy time, and they're just nicely rested and they don't need to think about their dreams. So we don't think there's any deficit with not remembering them. However, many people who do keep dream diaries and sometimes think and talk about their dreams can be quite open to their own experiences, open to their own emotional well-being, and can use their dreams as a bit of a tool for reflection. So they may look at their dream or an experience in their dream and recognize that they felt particularly frightened, and it just elicits a good conversation around, is there something in life that may scare you? Is there maybe a reason why you're feeling that while you are asleep? And I would caution against trying to interpret dreams or analyze dreams. I'm not an advocate of that. And there's certainly no evidence to suggest that you can interpret your dreams in a really meaningful way. But nevertheless, having conversations around dream content is just a good avenue, really, for thinking holistically and therapeutically. And we see that with children. Children often don't understand why they're waking up having been chased by a monster, or feeling utterly terrified by something that, in a book it's fine for an animal to talk, but when it happens in your sleep, or heaven forbid in waking life, it's really confusing. So talking to children about what they're dreaming about is another good conversation to try and interrogate emotional well-being in the broadest sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I I love sharing my hilarious dreams with my kids. They find it absolutely hilarious, some of the stuff that I've dreamt of, and bring to the breakfast table. There was one time recently I regularly attend a church, and one of my dreams, the worship leader, who's the guy at the front singing all the songs, started swearing and effing and blinding and kind of catching himself, and then looking rather sheepish and all embarrassed, and then trying to move on as if nothing had happened. And my daughter found that absolutely hilarious. Good conversations.
Dreams give us that great insight into the bizarre, and I'm glad to hear that you enjoy them around the breakfast table.
I'm a fan of learning, and it seems to be that science is telling us that sleeping after learning is a pretty good thing. Um, any insights on that? How does that work? How can we use sleep to enhance our learning?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you're absolutely right. There is a wealth of evidence that shows how important sleep is for the consolidation of information and memories. And what we mean by that is, after or during sleep, the information that we've experienced recently um, is strengthened, in terms of the location in the brain, in terms of the pathways around that information in the brain, and it does so actively. So, information that we have encountered prior to going asleep is actively sort of recreated and replayed to some extent when we go to sleep. And we can see that in some models in terms of specific cells that have brain cells that have fired during the learning experience. They fire at the same rate in the same order during sleep. So some people refer to that as replay, and they think that's all part of memory and experience pruning, strengthening the things that are important, and also erasing the things that are less important. And we see that through a number of models. But I caution against using the word replay, because in real terms, when we go to sleep, we don't reenact things in exactly the same way as we did experience. We can see it in basic animal models. There's some evidence from rats and mice that happens. But in humans, we don't think that we replay things. We think it's much more complicated. And it could well be that dreams are the kind of conscious side of this process of your brain cells
Mm.
firing when you are asleep. And that's why when I described dreams earlier as being a mix of kind of some parts of different memories and some recent things with some older things, um, that's how we see the brain activity during sleep. That's, we see areas of the brain not just from recent exposure to memories in the hippocampus, but we see these connections with parts of the cortex that represent our older, more established learning as well. But taken together, absolutely, the sooner after we've learned something we can sleep, the better. That doesn't mean we learn something and then sleep straight away. We need to keep a healthy sleep routines, but we certainly don't want to be losing out on sleep at a time when we're learning something new.
Yes, of course, because that would be, if we were losing out on sleep, then our memory and brain function would be declining. So we wouldn't get the benefits from the sleep after the learning if it's not so much sleep.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely.
Fantastic. Now, some people might have heard of the term sleep hygiene, and I'm sure you could speak to many people and you'd get many different definitions of sleep hygiene. I think of it as kind of good habits and routines that we can use to help us get to sleep and get good sleep. I'm curious to know, have you got a definition of sleep hygiene that you use, and what are the important things around that, that process of getting to sleep, staying asleep?
Yeah. Pleased you asked about this. We have had many conversations about sleep hygiene, and as a term, we're kind of trying to move away from using it actually, because the hygiene term, we know what we mean by it. It means, good, healthy sleep, but it sounds quite clinical, and perhaps it doesn't sound as warm and fuzzy and cozy as curling up under a duvet should. So, yes, in general, we talk about good, healthy sleep. And there are lots of principles that can predict good, healthy sleep that are evidence based. The more regular one's sleep routine, the better. That allows the body to learn the cues to switch off. So if you always clean your teeth 15 minutes before going to bed and get your pajamas on, then that is a cue for your body and your brain to say, okay, time to start winding down now. And that regularity is really important. It's also really good just to have regular routines, because that not only builds a good habit, but it maintains a good habit. So once we've established a good routine, it's more resistant to change. There's always going to be times when we might have an occasional late night or a really early flight, and our routine, for whatever reason, is knocked. But if we have a stable habit, then it can bounce back much more readily. So for me, my sleep it's great now. Which is fortunate, seeing as I tell people how important it should be. But in the past, I've had times in my life where it hasn't been so great, and I think it started improving as I was studying about the importance of sleep. So part of it for me is knowing how important sleep is, because I know it needs to be prioritized. So if I'm beginning to feel tired, I am now much more alert to those cues of tiredness, and I know, climb the stairs, get into bed. You may be tempted to melt into the sofa and watch yet another Netflix episode, but you are better off in bed. The other thing for me is about having a stable knowledge that sleep time needs to be protected. And we hear a lot of people talk about difficulties with switching off. And I know that when I'm really busy, or got a lot of deadlines looming, or something stressful the next day, that's when the mind will race, and that's when it's really hard to try and relax sufficiently to get to sleep at night. So again, telling myself that actually this is really important. The best thing you can do for yourself is to rest, and then you will be in much better form the next day, has helped me. So I know that I need to create some boundaries, and I need to say, go to bed, let yourself sleep, and that is the best thing for you. And actually just having that knowledge has allowed me to pretty much get to sleep the second my head hits the pillow. Some people would say I'm too tired, but I'm absolutely great in peak performance until I get to bed, and then I zonk out and I have really deep and sound sleep, and 9 times out of 10 will wake up feeling pretty rested.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's funny. It seems that as we are learning more about sleep and more about the importance of sleep, that message seems to be slowly getting out there. Maybe a decade ago, people were saying, "Oh, I'm getting by on 4 hours sleep," and it was something to be proud of. Number of years ago, I tried a little bit of polyphasic sleeping. So I'd do, maybe 3 or 4 hours, and then wake up and do, like, an hour of learning or reading or whatever it was, and go back to sleep for maybe an hour, and then have a little nap in the day later. I'm not sure. I didn't track anything. I didn't measure anything, so I'm not sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing. But you know, it was something that I experimented with a little while ago. But yeah, it seems to be that now, having that information, that this is what happens when we sleep. This is why it's so important. We don't think anymore that you just switch off and nothing happens. But actually, when you're asleep, there's some really important resting, restoring, sorting out of memories, organizing, and tissue repair and healing and all that kind of stuff going on. So yeah, having that knowledge and appreciation for how important it is, I guess, it is the number one step to getting in a good routine and getting some good practices. Do you have rules that you tell people, no screens after this time, you should sleep for this many hours a night? I mean, I find that averages are often misunderstood, and that people think if they don't hit 8 hours, then there's something awful is going to happen. But yeah, is there any other rules that you have?
Yeah, there are some universal truths, I guess, and things that we would recommend people do. And then there are some other specific tips that work better for some people than others. So the universal truths, I guess, are for us around prioritizing getting enough sleep, which usually means 7.5 hours. You mentioned 8 hours a night, and there's still this belief that we need 8 hours a night. And that is an average. That's taken from many, many different studies using many different methodologies, and 8 hours ish compared to 9 or 7 seems to be the best predictor of health. But when we look at our own sleep cycles, it takes about 90 minutes to transition through one full sleep cycle. And we need about 5 of those for optimal health. Well, that takes us to 7.5 rather than 8. But nevertheless, we need to allow people to prioritize getting about 7.5 hours of sleep. And that isn't the same as being in bed for 7.5 hours. So we would still say aim to be in bed for at least 8 hours, because that adds that extra buffer time to get to sleep. Sometimes people wake up in the night, might need to go to the toilet in the middle of the night, they might have a bit of a disturbance. And equally in the morning when you wake up, do we all leap out of bed feeling wonderfully rested and get out straight away? No, we don't. It takes a few minutes. And if we are leaping out of bed and running somewhere, it's probably because we're late and stressed. And that's not particularly good either. Prioritizing getting the right amount of sleep and having enough time in bed is one thing that's great. And another thing is, as I mentioned before, doing so in a regular way. So having consistent bedtimes, consistent wake times, and that will really help build up the strong habit. As regards phone use, caffeine, alcohol, each of those things individually will have heard can affect sleep, and for the most part, they really do. It's not the case for everyone. Phones are a distraction in terms of the blue light that they emit. They tell our brain that it's daytime, and so we're missing out on those cues to go to sleep. They're also, as perhaps we all know from personal experience, they're literally designed to grab our attention. They're designed to keep us hooked and to scroll onto the next thing and to click the next ad or to go onto the next page or the next app. And it's really hard psychologically to push that aside and not be tempted by it. So, depending on how much one person finds them tempting, it can be a really good idea to just put your phone charger downstairs or in a different room to the room that you sleep in, and try not to be tempted. If people wake in the night and they reach for their phone, they're going to be awake for longer than if their phone wasn't there.
Yeah, I've read the book Stolen Focus by Johan Hari, and he talks about how the world that we live in now is just designed to keep us distracted. And he talks about chatting to one of the guys working at Google, saying, I would never want my kids using this technology because it's just such a life drainer. You just get sucked in. And so doing that when you're awake and not supposed to be sleeping is one thing, but when you're trying to be asleep or wanting to be asleep or should be asleep for part of your 8 hours, then it's just going to be a recipe for disaster. Now I've got a question, because I I like to think of myself as an awesome sleeper. I have been known to fall asleep anywhere, anytime, and I don't have any trouble with sleep. I often will wake up in the night and then just go immediately back to sleep. And I often feel like some of the rules don't apply to me. Like I'm quite happy to have a double espresso before bed, and you know, and be playing on my phone before bed, and still think I do a pretty good job. Have you got any tips for me? Any advice or?
That's a great question. Well, I'm really glad that you're an awesome sleeper, truly, and that um, kind of strength of sleep that you mentioned, being able to go back to sleep when you wake is really great. And that is a good indication that you're a good sleeper. However, I would always ask people a little bit more rather than just assuming they're an awesome sleeper. There is a funny irony that people who are sleep deprived are pretty rubbish at identifying whether they've had enough sleep or not. So if you're falling asleep really easily, it could be that you're exhausted. So let's just check that you're getting your 7.5 hours ish, and that you're doing so in a routine fashion. So is there any advice for you? You know, if you're enjoying a double espresso before bed, is that because you feel you need to pick me up? It's likely that caffeine is still affecting you, and it could be that you sleep better without the caffeine rather than with. So I would just say, check whether the caffeine is necessary. If you are a caffeine non-responder, as some people are, then why have the caffeine at all? You may argue. But if you do feel like you recognize that caffeine affects you in the morning, for example, then you are a responder, and it will be, keeping you more alert in terms of the depth of sleep that you're having, and it will be preventing you from really getting the full benefits. But in general, enjoy sleeping and spread the word and be a great ambassador for good, healthy sleep.
Excellent, thanks. I will definitely do that. And very fascinating that you mentioned being a caffeine non-responder. I have not come across that term, but I feel like maybe I'm one of those because I will have, coffee throughout the day, and I don't seem to. It doesn't make any difference to me. I don't like need it to wake up. I don't mind having it before going to sleep. So maybe I am one of those non-responders. I'm going to check that out. You're going to send me down a rabbit hole now. Okay, so I have just a couple more questions. Um, you can decline to answer about lucid dreaming if you like, but I find the idea of lucid dreaming quite fascinating, and being able to control what you dream about, being able to practice skills in your sleep, makes more efficient the use of your sleep than letting it happen at maybe at chance. But maybe your body knows best. Maybe you don't know what's best to be controlling and practicing or learning or whatever it might be. Any thoughts on lucid dreaming?
I do. I do. I'm rather opinionated. I have thoughts on lots of things, David. But yeah, lucid dreaming is a really interesting topic because it's one of those things that really captures the interests of many. And it sounds great in theory that if you can control your own dreams, wow, you could have a great time, right? I mean, I really enjoy eating. And if I could enjoy eating without, necessarily ingesting and getting all the consequences of the physical food, that would be an absolute delight for me. But lucid dreaming, although it's kind of fascinating academically and in terms of our understanding of consciousness, it doesn't happen naturally really all that often. It's just such an overwhelmingly cool experience when it does, and I think that's why it piques people's interest. But when you experience lucidity, um, first of all that means is you're aware that you're dreaming. Okay, so all the rest of the time, 99.9 plus percent of the time, we just accept our experiences that occur when we're dreaming as if they're really happening. We don't question them. When we're lucid, though, we know it's a dream. And that's the definition. This idea that we can then control our dreams is a much more advanced kind of cognitive mechanism whereby we not only know that we're dreaming, or we know that we're asleep, we can also then change the content of what we're doing at that time. And the irony there is that we're virtually awake when we're doing it. So when we have those cool experiences, we are preventing ourselves from getting the benefits of sleep. And one can train themselves to have lucid experiences, and some people are very good at that. But for me, we're probably interfering with a natural process to the point of preventing us from getting the real natural benefits that sleep has evolved to afford us. So lucidity is cool, but for me, not as cool as sleep. And I think there's a little bit of a disproportionate interest in lucid experiences, when really we should be focusing on just snuggling under a duvet and switching off. That's the best thing that we can possibly do for ourselves.
That is a great tip. It's a little bit like investing in Tesla because you think it's a cool idea when you'd be better off just investing into a broad market index fund and just letting nature do its thing. I'm intrigued. Is there an example of a really bad question that people often ask you?
Ooh, I guess a question. I mean, in relation to sleep and dreams, people love talking about their own dreams, and usually that's great. But as a general rule, if someone starts off by saying you're going to find me really interesting, then there's a bit of an alarm bell. But a more general one, as a psychologist, is when people say, "Do you know what I'm thinking?" There's that real assumption that as a psychologist, you have some analytical insight into the workings of people's minds, and you, of course, you don't. You have some idea as to generally how thoughts are sequenced and how emotions may be processed. But if someone's saying, "Do you know what I'm thinking?" that's another alarm bell for me. So that's one of those questions that makes me take a bit of a step back.
Time to move on. Yeah. Is there anything you believe now, or used to believe, and now have changed your mind about, either work related or otherwise?
Um, I guess yes, for sure. I mean, sleep is one of those things, and you indicated this earlier with our understanding of sleep hygiene and how to sleep well increasing. Sleep is one component of what I would say is a fundamentally healthy lifestyle. And we can think of that as, the triumvirate of sleep, nutrition, and activity. So, sleep is a really good way of nudging our behaviors towards health, greater health, because the more we can sleep at the right times and sufficiently, then we are consciously as well as non-consciously going to make better choices about being active, having the energy to move healthily, and be inclined towards eating foods that are more nutritious and relevant for our needs at any one time. So I have changed my mind about sleep, as well as nutrition. And really, the thing that's changed for me in some ways is get the sleep right and just trust your body to make its own choices. You don't need to interfere. The body and the brain have evolved so perfectly that we can pretty much leave the system to do what it needs to do. If we just leave kids to make their own decisions about foods, they will pick the foods with the right nutritional content that their bodies need. They're not going to go on Haribo all the time. The system knows what it needs. And so although we need to make sure that we can protect our bodies from insufficient sleep, if you like, once we've done that, we can just let the rest do what it needs to do, and try not to overthink things and worry too much.
Excellent. Okay, couple of last couple of questions then. What brings you joy outside of your work as a chartered psychologist?
Dogs, for sure. Dogs and animals. I should probably say my children, shouldn't I, before, but dogs. Yeah, I tried to have a balanced and full life. We live in a bit of a zoo, and the pure joy of a wagging dog that greets you is wonderful. And we have a couple of big dogs; they need exercising quite a bit, and it forces us to get out and about. And I think that's a wonderful thing. It's just a very pure and innocent joy that offsets some of the more demanding challenges of work life sometimes. And I think we should all have animals in our lives.
Excellent. You mentioned earlier that knowing what somebody thinks isn't one of your superpowers. Do you have any other superpowers?
I wish I did. I don't think I have any superpowers. Uh, Unfortunately, I really I get a lot of pleasure in talking to people and listening to people, but I don't think that's a superpower. I think that's something that we can all enjoy together. So no, I'm an ordinary, fallible human who just enjoys sleeping, and I don't think that's a superpower. Though I think it's hard to achieve. But like I said, get that right, and other things will follow. Just an ordinary kind of guy, I think.
I was going to say, surely the ability to sleep it's got to be a superpower. I mean, I think it's something that a lot of people would love to have. So I'm going to put that down as your superpower. And last question then, what does living life to the full mean to you?
Yeah, I had to give this a bit of thought, when I knew we were going to chat, and given the title of your wonderful podcast. And I realised how boring I am, because living life to the full, I think, for me, means being a little bit boundaried and balanced. And that sounds like I'm preventing us from having fun, and I don't mean that at all. I think living life to the full when I was younger certainly meant doing everything, trying as many things as I could. But now I am older and I enjoy sitting more. I think I can be more comfortable with making decisions around knowing what I enjoy, and feeling comfortable with saying no to things that I know I don't enjoy. Of course, there are times when I've got to take the kids on a dreaded zip wire because some adult has to take responsibility for them. But I know that that's not my thing. And as much as someone else may say, it's really thrilling, you'll love it, I know I won't. And so I feel comfortable saying no to things because I've tried them before. So at this point in life, I think, I do say yes to a lot of things. I keep myself very busy, but also I ring fence and protect time to switch off. And of course, sleep has taught me that, really. But it's not just through sleep, it's through taking time to try and enjoy a book, or just sitting. It's okay to just sit and daydream and just have that quality time for yourself sometimes, in moderation and in balance. So living life to the full, I think, is about enjoyment, it's about balance, and to some extent it's about boundaries. And I may be the most boring guest you've had in having boundaries as one of your living life to the full answers.
Absolutely not. There's, I guess he's a famous blogger, entrepreneur, writer called Seth Godin, and I've mentioned it on the podcast before, but he talks about the importance of having boundaries on an ice hockey rink, because if you've ever played ice hockey on a frozen lake and you just hit the puck, you realize very quickly why you have boundaries in life, because it's a long way to skate to get the puck if you miss it. So I think boundaries very, very important. Something that I am slowly learning in my life as well. So that's a great answer. And finally, if anyone is interested in sleeping for health, physical, emotional, what resources could you point them towards, and where can people find out about you or get in touch?
People are very welcome to get in touch. So we're running a program. We've been developing it for some years, called the Sleep Well program, and it's a research endeavour where we've been developing a sleep improvement program that's really very simple. It's around finding out a bit more about sleep, and then deciding which sleep improvement health behaviours may work for you, and people have the choice to try some of those. So if people want to take part in that, they can email sleepwell@bishopg.ac.uk. I'm on Twitter or X, at Sleep and Memory. And otherwise, I think probably the most important thing is people should try to take the time to focus on their own sleep behaviors a little bit, because that's something that generally we just don't do. There is still a cultural tendency to see sleep as deficient relative to our time spent awake, and that it's not important and it gets in the way, or it prevents us from being alert and active and adventurous, and we squeeze sleep time and we don't honor it in the way that we should. So really, we should start with looking at when we feel tired, when we're yawning. Are we getting to the point at night when we're just too tired to climb the stairs and get in bed? And if so, we should already be in bed. We need to recognize those cues and preempt them rather than wait until it's too late. So start with looking at yourself, start with asking a few questions. When do I normally go to sleep? Do I fall asleep really quickly, or does it take a while? Am I actually a little bit too alert? Should I be trying to give my body a little bit more time to get into that sleep routine so it knows now is the time and I can switch off, and wake as well? So encourage your listeners to just look at themselves, and usually we can find the answers and we recognise what we need ourselves.
Fantastic. Well, Dr. Caroline Horton, that has been an absolute pleasure to chat with you. I've learned lots and I'm looking forward to listening again to take it all in the second time. So there we have it. My interview with Dr. Caroline Horton. Thank you again, Caroline, for coming on the show, and I hope you very much enjoyed it as you're listening at home, or in the car, or out for a run, or on holiday in Germany, or working away from home in Germany or Lithuania, wherever you are. Here are some of the key takeaways that I had from that podcast interview. Key takeaway number 1, sleep is so much more than just restoring ourselves physically. It plays a key role not only in our physical health, but also our mental health and our ability to make good decisions and good judgments.
So this physical experience of sleep that is multifaceted and includes lots of different stages, recuperates us, helps us fight off illness, gives us energy. That's the thing we think of most clearly with sleep. It rests us so we can live another day with great energy, but also psychologically and emotionally and cognitively, it's allowing us to work at optimal capacity.
Knowing what happens when we sleep makes us realize how important sleep actually is. And having this knowledge and learning about why sleep is important is really, really important when it comes to prioritizing your sleep. So that's key takeaway number 2. Learn about sleep and prioritize your sleep.
Part of it for me is knowing how important sleep is, because I know it needs to be prioritised. So if I'm beginning to feel tired, I am now much more alert to those cues of tiredness. And I know, climb the stairs, get into bed. You may be tempted to melt into the sofa and watch yet another Netflix episode, but you are better off in bed.
If we are going to prioritise our sleep, then that leads us to key takeaway number 3. Get a sleeping routine going on. The routine of going to bed at the same time and waking up at the same time, regardless of whether it's a weekday or the weekend, is really important for good sleep hygiene, although we do need to come up with a better term for that.
There are lots of principles that can predict good, healthy sleep that are evidence-based. The more regular one's sleep routine, the better. That allows the body to learn the cues to switch off. So if you always clean your teeth 15 minutes before going to bed and get your pajamas on, then that is a cue for your body and your brain to say, okay, time to start winding down now. And that regularity is really important.
Key takeaway number 4. Sleep really helps with learning. Now, if you're someone like me and you love to learn, or you have to learn stuff for whatever reason it might be, then learning before you sleeping helps you consolidate what you've learned.
Information that we have encountered prior to going asleep is actively sort of recreated and replayed to some extent when we go to sleep. And we can see that in some models in terms of specific brain cells that have fired during the learning experience. They fire at the same rate in the same order during sleep.
And finally, key takeaway number 5. Use your dreams as a way of connecting to other people. We all know how important it is to have good relationships, and one of the ways that we can do that is to talk about our dreams. It helps us to explore our own emotions and explore emotions with other people, and that helps build connections.
We don't think there's any deficit with not remembering them. However, many people who do keep dream diaries and sometimes think and talk about their dreams can be quite open to their own experiences, open to their own emotional well-being, and can use their dreams as a bit of a tool for reflection. So they may look at their dream or an experience in their dream and recognise that they felt particularly frightened, and it just elicits a good conversation around, is there something in life that may scare you? Is there maybe a reason why you're feeling that while you are asleep?
So those are my 5 key takeaways and the things that I have learned from today's episode. I hope you learned something new as well. Don't forget, you can get in touch with me on Life to the Full podcast on Instagram or David Morse. I'll respond to any DMs and I'd love to hear from you. Ask me any questions. I'll get Caroline back on if you want me to. But for now, get out of here. No, I can't pull that off. It's from Gotham Chess. Alright, peace out.